Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Uh, I'm really excited about today's talk. We've got two wonderful guests. Ramy's running late. That's why you don't see him on the screen right now, but he will be on in a few minutes, I think. So I'm going to start off with our wonderful writer, director, producer, Cherian Davis. She has made two impeccable films, Amrika and May in the Summer, very bold films. I'm very curious as to how you got them made, to be honest. You've directed and written for television, Ozark, Ramy, Quantico, Empire, list goes on. You started in a writer's room, from my understanding, with the L Word and some other writer's rooms. So welcome, Cherian, to Meet the Kalakars.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I kind of wanted to start with just your journey into film. I think you have a really interesting story, and sadly, it's still a story that is very relevant today in terms of, you grew up in the Midwest, your Jordanian and Palestinian background. The Gulf War was a huge impact on your perspective of media. You had that crazy story about your sister and the FBI coming to your high school. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about a little bit of what sort of where this filmmaking aspect came to you.
Yeah, I mean, you actually touched upon a lot of aspects of it, but I basically, so I was the first person in my family born in the U.S., the first born American. And I grew up in a small town, really small town in Ohio, and Jordan, kind of going back and forth all the time. So very, very different, very, very different places, very schizophrenic upbringing, where I was sort of just trying to make sense of my own identity, always kind of trying to bring these two different sides of who I was closer together. And when I was 12, my parents bought a video camera. They handed it to me because I like to figure out how things worked. And I read the manual and I started using it. And they asked me to videotape like really boring things like birthday parties and Christmas parties. And so I just started telling people what to do on camera. And thus my directing career was born, literally. Yeah. Just as a boss kid, I started telling people what to do on camera and literally telling them what to say just to make it fun. And then a couple of years later, the first Gulf War, exploded, and my entire experience growing up in Ohio just totally changed. My family went from being kind of friends and neighbors, and sure, we were somewhat exotified and we were different, but we were never really discriminated against until the first Gulf War, when we just became like total pariahs and outcasts. We got death threats on a daily basis. The Secret Service came to my high school to investigate a rumor. My older sister threatened to kill the president. And it was just one thing after another. And that was definitely the first time in my life where I started really paying attention to the media and noticing that not only were we underrepresented, we were horrifically, misrepresented. And people were literally believing what they were seeing. And therefore we were suffering these stereotypes of, being called terrorists and whatever else. So I kind of made it my mission at that point to tell our side of the story, to tell, stories of the underrepresented and the misrepresented and just, represent, basically, realizing that there was just like no one like me or like anyone I knew in my family or, my sort of Arab people in film or television anywhere. And that was sort of how my career was born.
Yeah. And talking about representation, and obviously Amrika is all about representation and identity, obviously. I'd love to hear the journey of getting that film made. I know you struggled to get it off the ground, to finding a producer. If you could walk us through sort of that process, that'd be great.
Yeah, so that film, I mean, it's funny, that film was with me from the time I was 14 in a way, like from the time that I said, I want to do this thing, I want to tell our side of the story. That idea of something, of storytelling was born in me. And then it took me about 10 years to get to film school. In my early 20s. In fact, in September of 2001, I moved to New York City just days before 9/11. And I went to film school at Columbia. I did the graduate program there. And that was where I started writing Amrika. It wasn't that long a process. On average, they say it takes about 5 years to get an independent film off the ground. And from the time I started writing Amrika until the time it was in production, it was about 5 years. So I wrote it really in film school, and then I took it out afterwards, and I had a short film that did relatively well on the festival circuit, and I had my feature script. and I just started applying for everything. I mean, my strategy was just like go wide and don't take no for an answer. And no just means not now. So I would reapply later after revising the script, and I just kept trying and trying and trying until I started to get yeses. And I just mean on the level of like, we're going to invite you to this director's lab, like Film Dependent, and, finding kind of champions within the film, like independent film community.
Sure.
And that was really how my career got started, was, armed with a short film that proved that I could write and direct, and, that, like I said, did well in the festival circuit. And then armed with this feature screenplay, I was able to then apply to all of these different programs and just find people who started to champion me and champion my work.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the way in which we got that made was, I mean, my producer actually found me. I was profiled in Filmmaker magazine, and a Canadian producer who's like has a Middle Eastern background reached out to me. And she was actually a first-time feature producer. So in a way, we both took a risk on each other, and it paid off big time. And she's actually a very successful Canadian producer now.
Oh, awesome.
So it's kind of amazing that, we sort of found each other, and she was the first producer who really understood what I was trying to do, which, in other words, she kind of understood the humor. The humor of my film was not really coming across, especially to like white American executives who would read it. They didn't really understand that there could be a Palestinian American story that started in the West Bank that could be funny.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started really connecting with, people who like understood that we need this humor. Like this is actually meant to be funny. And so that actually was a real game changer. And then ultimately we went out to, we kind of used like the Arab phone tree. Like it was literally like, we just started calling everyone we knew. Like, I kid you not, at one point, I got the donor list of the Arab American Museum. They were kind enough to give me their donor list and the contact information of all of the donors.
Wow.
And I just started calling them. And like Casey Kasem was on that list. Like all of these like big, Tony Shalhoub was on the list. It was like all of these people. And I couldn't believe I got this list, but I just started calling people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You do what you can.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a combination of obviously leaning on your own community because they understand what you're making, and then collaborating with people who've got that understanding. Is that something you feel like you carry with you today in finding collaborators?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think community is so important, and at the same time, finding your champions within the independent film community, and whether it's film or television, actually, just finding your champions, people who really understand what it is you're trying to do and say. And I think that's really important, nurturing those relationships. Ultimately it ended up being one of the programs that I did that introduced me to my executive producer, who's the person who brought on our anchor financier for my first film. And that was massive. I mean, for me to find that first chunk of financing for my first feature film was just such a huge moment.
Yeah, of course.
And I ended up meeting this Arab American woman it was Tribeca, actually. It was through the Tribeca, what's that development program called? I can't remember now.
It's not All Access.
Tribeca All Access.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Tribeca All Access. They introduced me to an executive producer who was Arab American, who ended up bringing on our anchor investor, who literally put in like 50% of the financing.
Oh, wow.
So it was a really big deal. So it was a combination of leaning on my own community, but also really leaning on people who were already kind of understanding and championing who I was and what I was trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking a step back and talking about applying and reapplying. So kind of a twofold question here. One, like, how do you continue to find the motivation after so many no's? And then two, what do you feel like changed beside your script, obviously? Anything strategically that you may have changed while applying to labs and for grants and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I think you develop a thick skin pretty quickly, or at least you have to. And I was still in film school when I started applying for all of this stuff. And I was sitting on a mountain of no's. And after a while, discouragement just gets really boring, frankly. I think I just was like, I think I was reading a lot of people's stories of like how they were getting their work off the ground and really realizing what it took, and realizing that all it takes is one yes. I mean, you can have a million no's. It doesn't matter. You get one yes, you get it made, and it's done. So once I started thinking about it that way, I just refused to be discouraged, and I just decided to keep going until I got it made. And I think that's the kind of tenacity that you need. And when you're applying to programs, I think I also got some encouragement to reapply. So, and that was great. And once I learned, I think I read that someone who was ultimately finally invited to the Sundance Labs applied 3 times before they were finally invited. So that means they were rejected 3 times. And I found such inspiration in that, because I thought, well, that's amazing. That means that no doesn't mean no. It just means not now. Like, go back, do the work, bring it back. Go back, do the work. It's gotten better. Take a look. You know what I mean? And that's really what this process is. Writing is rewriting. And if you can show that you're putting in the work and you're super committed and you're going to do whatever it takes to get it off the ground, and the work is actually improving, then I think you're always welcome to reapply.
Yeah, that's great. I want to talk about process and characters, and flawed characters especially, but Ramy just joined. Actually, this is a great kind of transition, because his characters are quite flawed as well. So if we can unmute, and Ramy, if you could turn on your camera, that'd be great.
Am I in?
Yeah, you're in.
Am I on?
Yes, you're on. You're
awesome.
on.
Dude, I love the look. I like the look.
I'm going Egyptian dad.
I love it. I'm being reminded of Egyptian characters right now.
Well, welcome to Kalakars, Ramy. Really appreciate you doing this. So we did kick off before you got on, but before we start, I did want to say congratulations to you, the whole entire team, including you, Cherian, for your Peabody today. I mean, that's surreal, I'm sure. So congratulations.
Thank you. No, it's super. It's truly like every person involved. It's crazy. It's such a crazy thing because it's the thought process that goes into it is really cool. It's not just like popularity contest stuff. It's like they're watching it and they're thinking, oh, this is awesome. And obviously Cherian directed almost half the season of our first season. She did 4 episodes. So Mbruk to you. It's really, really cool.
It's awesome. I couldn't be prouder.
Awesome. So I know we don't have you guys for too long, so I'm just going to kind of start drilling you guys with some more questions here. So don't mind if I do. But Ramy, we were sort of talking about Cherian's career, how she started off, and sort of her wonderful films. And my next question, could go to both of you guys really is, one of the things that I think our community often finds is talking about the model minority. And both Cherian, in your work, you often have flawed characters. Ramy, obviously your character is quite flawed, and not just your character, but other characters in your show. I guess my question really is, what challenges do you sort of face when you're pitching a show like this, when oftentimes they want like a clean cut version of what a Palestinian might be or what an Egyptian Muslim might be?
I don't know. Cherian, do you think the trouble comes in the pitch or more so in putting it out?
I mean, I think that's a good question. I think both. I think it can come in both. I think it sort of depends. But I can see why you would ask that.
Yeah, because in the pitch, you kind of want to pitch a flaw because you need tension.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You need something. Otherwise, it's not interesting, right? It's like you need to talk about, well, they want this, but they're this way, or like you just need those complications, which essentially are flaws, right? And so, I mean, I don't know how to pitch something super clean cut.
Expected.
Yeah. I think it's more in the release where I find your question that I'm sure we both experienced. I definitely experienced it with my show, is that the audience is really in an unfair position because they don't have a lot of choice to see anything that is even attempting to speak honestly to what they're going through, right? And so it kind of creates this scarcity mindset in obviously the real landscape, the reality of the landscape, but also in the way it's consumed, which is like there's just this feeling of like, oh, is this the only thing that we're going to have? Because there's so little, a show like the one Cherian and I made, it's the Arab show, it's the Muslim show, even though there's so many experiences under those umbrellas, but no show is like the white show, right? So it's kind of like it's marketed in a certain way and it's felt in a certain way that that's where the depiction of, you know, a flawed character really comes to play.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. And when writing those, you know, I'd love to know sort of the process when it comes to writing, because I think you've done a wonderful job of kind of capturing voices of obviously Ramy, but Dina's character, your mother's character. Sort of, how does that process work for you in terms of writing? And Cherian, I had the same question for you when you're writing. Do you like? Are you guys both outliners, for example? I know some people love them, some people hate them. Would love to hear about your process in that.
I feel like I walked in on Cherian saying something about rewriting as I like popped into the Zoom. That's definitely been part of. I mean, I think last season and this season we're constantly. I mean, for me, what's been really cool about having Cherian on the episodes has been. I mean, I think Cherian's been very honest with me when she feels like stuff's working or stuff's not working, which has been informative for rewrites. And I think most of the time we agree. And then there's like certain scenes where we like don't agree, and I like that too. Because it just informs, I think, what's really happening for our characters. It's like we need to be trying to hit it at, you know, as many thoughtful vantage points as possible that feel like they're part of the palette of the world. And I think as a producing director, I've definitely felt that collaboration with Cherian on the show. And then for me, when I'm in the writer's room, we're constantly just like interrogating each other, and we're really big rewrite fans. I mean, we're rewriting up to the wire.
Yeah. Cherian, could you talk about writers' rooms? I know you have a lot of experience in writers' room. I think that's a perspective that is often not talked about. I'd love to sort of understand the functionality and how it works when you're in the room, especially as a woman of color when you're working on stuff that's not Ramy.
Yeah. On non-Ramy shows. I just want to say, it's so, before I get into that, and that's a great question, I think what's really interesting to note is like when you're first starting to write, I think it's really easy to really defend your point of view and get really married to what it is you're trying to say. And it's understandable in part because you want people to understand you. You really want to make sure people are understanding what you're going for. But in that, I think sometimes when we're new writers, we get really stuck in defending what we are trying to do and defending what we've written. And I commend Ramy so much. And it's because he is so open. And from the very first season, he was so open and hungry for honesty, like honest feedback. And I think I was really surprised by that. Like, sorry, Ramy, but I just was like really surprised by how open you were, like really pleasantly surprised, because I just thought, you know, I just didn't know what to expect, first of all. And I have worked on shows, by the way, where you can't be that honest with the creator or the showrunner or the writer of the episode or whatever. And you do have to be, you know, so every show is different, right? Every show is like a completely different, like, political world and environment and people, and you got to kind of learn the politics and who's your ally as far as like who can you be honest with and who do you need to kind of, you know, skirt or dance around or, you know, just be delicate with. And it's just really interesting, you know, working on Ramy, everything's so straightforward. Like I came into a world that I just I had so much affinity for and love for and understanding of. And that was just so amazing and different from anything I've ever done. Because very often, like I've been on shows either as a director or, you know, in the writer's room where I'm like the token Middle Eastern person and I'm considered like a quote expert. And it's my job to help them get it right, which has sucked so much. And I hung up my hat at a certain point and was like, I am done. I'm not here to help you get it right. I'm not, you know, I'm not doing that anymore. But that was how I built my career. I mean, even the L Word, part of the reason why I think I was brought onto that show was because they wanted to create a character who had just returned from the war in Iraq. So they felt they needed a Middle Eastern perspective on that, you know? So it's just interesting that was kind of how it all started. And it has been really challenging to be in some of those rooms where I'm the voice of this place and this land and this people and this religion.
An entire portrayal of humanity. You being Iraqi, of an entire portrayal of humanity, and also like you being Iraqi. It's like it's close enough, right?
Close enough, yeah,
exactly. I'm like
Palestine, Iraq. You know, it's all.
I'm a queer Palestinian American woman. Like, I don't know what part of that makes you think I know anything about, what it means to be at war in Iraq. But
It's like a veteran. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I did what I could, you know what I mean? But on some of these, it was just like such a losing battle on some shows. But the process is interesting. Every writer's room is different, and the process
is there
and places you shoot too. I mean, just speaking to Cherian's point about that defensiveness, it's really, for me, I walked into a show where a lot of it was based on stand-up, and so much of stand-up is just getting humiliated in front of a group of people. And I think like what ends up happening is, I think with a lot of people who write, they're so precious about their script because they're not used to being in front of 100 people and being like, oh, I was wrong. I have no problem doing that because I've been doing that for 10 years. I just get up and just totally eat it. Like, just like try and say some idea and just have a group of people just be like, no, that's not good. And so it's exciting for me to hear that honest thing, and it's also where you're shooting. Like, it's so funny. There's set etiquette. And I think when we went to Cairo, Cherian, it was really funny because it was like the dude who's bringing the sandwiches is like, yo, say this line. This is going to be like way funnier. And you're like, dude, this would never happen in America. I'm like getting line pitches from the lighting dude. And I took a couple. I'm not going to say I didn't. I was like, that's a pretty good pitch. I'll do it.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, Cairo was great. It was so much fun to shoot there. I love the Middle East.
Talking about set etiquette and setting the tone for sets, it obviously seems like it's a very collaborative set, and so and as Cherian said, that's sort of hard to find, especially in TV, right? Especially when you're doing, as people would say, Hulu and Ramy is independent TV as compared to prime time and all that. So how do you set the tone for that? How do you go about setting the tone from the get-go of not just with the set, but with Hulu and A24 of this is how we want to do this?
Well, I will say it is definitely collaborative. It's definitely open. It's also very, very stressful. And I think between traveling internationally, between okay, for example, this year when we shot, we were dealing with basically, we have Mahershala in 6 episodes and we only have him for 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
So it's just, there's like a gun just on your, just go. And so I think for me, the important thing is, again, it's like, everyone's in this together and everyone's struggling to make it work and we don't have enough days and we don't have, all of that. And it's just really important, I think, to Cherian's point about how we talk about things. It's just putting a precedence on honesty and bringing everything else kind of under it, whether personal, oh, this hurt my feel, anything like that. For me personally, I'm like, I gotta eat that because if I'm struggling, everyone else must be, because they're carrying lights and they're doing all that stuff. And so it's just human stuff on a level, just really kind of recognizing what everyone's going through to make this, imaginary scene happen.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You guys both sort of talked about representation and all of that. I kind of wanted to talk about, the show is very specific, right? It's a microscope on the sort of family. However, it's clearly a very universal show. And so when writing or directing, is that something you keep in your back of your mind of how, how the show will come off as universal, or are you kind of honing in just on the specificness of it?
I think we were surprised after season 1. I remember Cherian, we were talking about some stuff. There'd be times where we'd be like, are people going to get this? Because it was so specific. And then you're like, oh, I guess people do. What you remember that, right?
Oh yeah. No, I remember that. And what an amazing surprise. I think that, you do often worry about that, when you're writing for your community, when you're writing the specificity. But one of the things that I've learned in my career, and funny enough, it wasn't always this way. I remember when I was starting out, I remember an executive saying to me when he first read the script for Amrika, this is not for us. It's just too culturally specific. And it was kind of within the context of, we love immigrant stories, but this one's just too culturally specific. And I remember walking out of that room and going isn't that what makes it unique? I mean, I've only seen 1 million immigrant stories. Isn't what makes this one unique the fact that it is is culturally specific,
Right.
and it's from the point of view we've not seen. And over the years, what I've learned and what I feel like this industry is finally now saying, and I hear people saying this now, and I get excited, specificity is universal. Specificity is universal. Everyone used to think that, like, oh, you have to write kind of generally, which means generically. Well, that's just bad writing. And now it's just like people get excited about the cultural specificity. And, you know, we're moving into a world where people are more and more excited by diversity and different voices, and like hearing from like here's a little window into a world we've never seen before. That's amazing. And I think that more and more we need to like be telling people that, because that's, I think, what people want now.
Yeah.
Finally.
But it's also too, it's like it's changing times, right? I mean, it's like and so it's like I can imagine you getting that note probably in the same era where like I would have considered changing my name as an actor, right? Because it's like I feel like we saw so many people kind of be like, well, no, I'm not Waleed, I'm Wally, or you know, like something like that. And so now it's like, well, the harder your name is to write, it's like bring him in, like we'll talk to her, you know, like it's just like the whole thing has shifted, you know, and that is that's a testament to the larger culture.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a testament to the people who've been like doing the work, you know, who've been out there just like really pushing for this kind of change. And I think it's amazing. Like we're finally getting somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Ramy, before you came on, Cherian was talking about, we were talking about getting rejected. Obviously you started off as an actor, so I'm sure you're quite familiar with auditioning and getting rejected, but what was the process with pitching Ramy? Going around pitching that and the rejections with that, if any?
We were very fortunate. I mean, I think we took it to like 6 places, and we got offers from 3 of them, which is great. You really only need one, you know. So to be able to have a few people who are interested in making it was really exciting. And yeah, I think part of the rejection process, though, even as an actor, was very much, you know, I would go into rooms and it would just be like, well, you're not. Well, we thought you were more ethnic based on the name, so we kind of look, we're not sure, or like, oh, you're not exactly the dork, but you're definitely not the lead. Like it was always just kind of this like weird thing, and as a performer, and again, like getting to write your own stuff and getting to sit into, you know, showing people how the range you can have and all of that, is the best remedy to, I mean, it's why rejection's amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll get leads with the mustache though, for sure.
Dude, this was the move, man. This is the move. I've been like, how did I not do this earlier? This is like, I figured my real look out during quarantine.
Kind of speaking on what you just hit on, and Cherian, I'd love for you to talk about this too, but like seizing the moment and having that mindset of, you know, once you do land at the L word, once you do land at your next job, looking forward, how do you sort of like get into the mindset of the next step? You know, and Cherian, you kind of spoke about this a little bit earlier of, you know, you had this short film that did really well on the festival circuit. You had this feature ready to go. It could be kind of exhausting, right? Of constantly seeing what's next. But I guess to shorten my question here is this idea of seizing the moment. And Ramy, you talked about this too in the past, of once you got your show at Nick and Night, you sort of started talking about like, oh shit, I can probably do some more of this. So I'd love to kind of get inside the brain of the mentality of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, just for all of us, we're all just trying to get on the board, right? You just need one thing. You just need you just get that one credit just so you can be like, no, I'm from the thing. And then they're like, okay, like it's so much of the industry is like vetting, you know, and so much of it is just because so many people want to be in it. It's like when you get that one thing, I think you have to run for it. And I don't know when you stop running. I'm not sure, because it's like every time you think you've got like hit the thing that you're like, well, okay, then I got this, and you're like, nah, I don't know. Like it never really like it's kind of part of the creative pursuit, and I think it's what we'd like, right? I think if any of us wanted stability, we'd probably like be doing way different things. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just like constantly leveraging, you know, from one thing to another. And I can imagine that's even more pertinent from like making the jump from short to feature, Cherian.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, like, the younger you are, like, the hungrier you are, and, like, you're getting started, and you're just like, yeah, you're constantly thinking about what's next. And for me, the short was just to leverage the feature. So it was like, what was hilarious to me was, I remember after making Amrika, and it was like 5 years of like a very uphill challenge, let's say, and like traveling all over the world looking for the cast, and just back and forth between, New York and the West Bank when I was, sort of in soft prep. And I remember after making the movie and like screening it at Sundance, like the first question that people asked all the time was, "What's next?"
Yeah.
And I was like, I'd like to just sleep a little. Like, that's what's next for me right now. So, it's just all about like where you're at and what you're, you know, and also I think so much of it is like, you have to be inspired. You kind of have to be inspired. So you run and you run, but you also have to be inspired.
Mhm.
So it's like this balance of wanting to always have that next thing, but also wanting to make sure that you're not just having a next thing to have a next thing,
Mhm.
but that you're actually inspired by this next thing. And that I think can be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, definitely. Going back on representation, do you guys feel the pressure of representing all of, in Ramy's case, Muslims around the world, as they say? I mean, I kind of find it annoying, to be quite honest, when I read articles, or it's like this Muslim show, and it's like, well, it's not it's much more than that. And like, same question for you, Cherian. Like, you obviously do a lot of work around strong women. Do you feel any pressure on the on representation on that?
Yeah, I mean, for our show, again, there's like a scarcity issue in terms of the actual landscape, and then in terms of the mindset. And I think we're really worried, as the various Muslim communities, of what people are going to think about us. And so I'm very aware of this idea that people want to place the importance of representation onto the show, but I very much, feel that, hear it, and don't create from it. Yeah, I think it's it's very short sighted. Like, I think, like, even I think about, I rewatched Amrika actually pretty recently, within the last year, because I was showing it to a friend. It just kept coming up, and then we watched it together. And I was like, oh yeah, this is like, you'll be able to watch this at any time, because it's about people going through something. It's like they're actually going through a complication. They're not talking about like a hot topic. This is just like there's a real desire. And I think my show, what we've made with Ramy is like, we're really looking at someone struggling with their faith. And in order to do that, we're looking at his ego, we're looking at his desires, we're watching how he's struggling between those two things, and it gets super messy. But that's the only way to tell the story that I want to tell. And so I would have a fork in the road where I can say, well, I'm the only Arab Muslim show right now on the air. So should I just like play to that, or should I just play to the thing that I want to play to and talk about? And I find it an interesting thing, because I think like American Muslims sometimes will be like, dude, like, this isn't how you should show us. Like, why are you doing this? And the interesting thing is how much people love the show overseas, in a place like Egypt that has a ton of Muslim representation. And then they're like, oh, this is like hitting on this wavelength of things we've been wanting to talk about. So I think when you stop being so obsessed with how you look, and you stop being so obsessed with what other people think, which is kind of like at the core of the issues of a lot of the things that we go through as culturally, you start to be able to like actually consume art. And again, because not a lot of art is made for our communities, we also don't know how to consume it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that's such a great point. And I so completely agree. It's like the burden of representation is just always sitting on your shoulder, and you're just so aware of it. But you have to really learn to turn away from it, and to do what inspires you, and do what you want to do, and like really be true to your vision of something, and not cave to some fear that you have. And it's absolutely something that I have like really dealt with a lot, in creating not necessarily strong Arab female characters, but in including, for example, queer storylines in
Sure.
my work, where it's like this fear of the fact, the fear that the movie will be not seen or criticized or sort of banned or whatever it is. And yeah, there are definitely, that burden of representation can be very very burdensome.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you get blowback for Amrika at the time? Was there stuff that people were upset about?
I actually, surprisingly, there was very little blowback. I definitely, we screened the film for a lot of Jewish communities in the US, and I definitely, there were Zionist audience members who were very upset about the fact that I used the word Palestine and occupation and like wanted to deny those things.
Right.
So that was interesting. Like those were interesting conversations. And then when I screened the film in Palestine, it was overwhelming, like just overwhelming joy and love. And then again, there was like a very small crowd of people who actually really liked the film, but were like, well, but why did you make the principal Jewish? And why are you normalizing a relationship between a Palestinian woman and a Jewish man? And so it was, again, interesting conversations and things that I kind of knew going into it that might be an issue, even though that movie was like, the least controversial film on the planet.
No, but people will find and I think people just, and I think that's where it's really important from a creative standpoint. You cannot write to anticipated criticism because it'll hit you from places you couldn't even imagine. We season 2 posted a photo of me and Sheikh Ali, played by Mahershala Ali, praying. And I got 6 messages, like random things being like, hey brother, like, I think his arms are like a little too high in the prayer position. And then like another one being like, hey brother, don't you think it's like a little much with the beads? Like, I think it was just like a little much. And like the position, and I'm like, okay, I mean, well, you haven't even seen the show. You're not going to like the show. I mean, it's already, but again, it's like our audiences, we don't have the opportunity. It's like we have so little to watch that we're just in shock when we see anything. And I think it skews. Like sometimes people will talk about certain characters on my show or my character on my show, which is much different than real me. And they'll be like, oh my God, he's such a mess. He's so embarrassing. He's so shameful. And I can't help but think that if my character were white, he'd just be complex. But there's just these burdens of, it's just this like, dude, come on. Like you like, how dare you, that again, doesn't speak to what's actually happening in the work.
Yeah. No, totally. And and that's kind of what I was getting at, is like the media portrayal of, or the media feedback has always been like this Muslim show. And I don't, when I watch it, I'm not often thinking about that. I'm just like, oh yeah, I relate to this shit. And that's all it is. So real quick, we have about 15-20 minutes left, folks. If you can get your questions in, we'll curate them and we'll ask Ramy or Cherian. I wanted to ask you both, and Nashwa actually brought this up as well in our chat box over here. You both have experience with writing, writing, directing, and acting in your own work. What are the challenges between, going behind the camera, in front of the camera?
Yeah, Cherian.
I was going to say, Ramy, you take this one. You've done it so much better than I did.
Did you like acting? Like, did you like acting and directing at the same time?
I had such an incredible challenge on my second film. I had half the money that I got to make my first film. I had troubles with 2 different financiers. I had just an incredibly stressful experience. I ended up being the lead producer, which was a total accident. I did not want at all to produce. And I was like the only liaison between the Lebanese, Jordanian, and American crew. And then I lost all of my key crew at the last minute because the film wasn't greenlit in time. It was a mess. It was a total mess. I had to hire a new crew. So I would say this. I would say that on my best days, I absolutely loved it. Like when you get into the groove, the way that I always kind of likened it to was, it felt to me like literally just like when you're acting, you're like zooming in on a long lens on like a really specific point of view of one person. And then you just have to lose control and forget about everything else. And then when you're directing, you just have to zoom out into like a super wide lens. And now you see everything and you know everything and you know what everyone's about to say and do. And so it's like this dance of like literally just 2 opposite extreme lenses, but like the same process, a similar process, so I found it really satisfying on my best days, and on my worst days, I absolutely hated it. I'd love to do it again, but who knows?
that speaks though to the indie nature, right? Because it's like sometimes I would be like, man, we have a low budget and we this and this and that, but like truly that's like straight up you're like picking up food on the way. I mean, like when you're making an indie film, it's just such a different experience. And like I I came up like making sketches and short films and stuff where you're like in it and you're writing and it's like it's such a different like that's really tough. I think like obviously there's a different support system on Ramy when I'm getting to do the thing where I'm directing and acting. I personally like when we went into season 2, we have 4 standalone episodes and there were like and there's also like really there was going to be an idea for me. I was like, there's like a story with the uncle, story with the dad, and then maybe I'll direct one that I'm in. And that was kind of like my idea. And then because of Mahershala's schedule, I ended up actually having to just direct ones that he was around for. So I was in them. I prefer, like, even if I think back to season 1, like like the episode with me and Steve, or like the first episode in Cairo, as an actor, I prefer that I wasn't directing them. Like that you were directing them. It was just easier because like it's just nice to have somebody watch you like on a level. It's just like and get feedback from that place. I like, I was only able to do it on the Farouk episode in season 2. I just like being behind the monitor when I'm directing. Like I like to just like see the frame and just be there and like have a water. Like it's just it's just easier. Like I don't need to be directing myself. Like it's just I don't want to I don't need to like whatever. And I think obviously too on a show like on Ramy, like obviously like I'm gonna say, hey, I want to say this different or go back. Like it's such a collaboration. So it's not like it's just more about like mindfulness. Like it's just nice to have other eyes, less than like someone like it's just I think
totally
that's where I face the biggest balance, where there's times where I'm in it and directing where I'm just like that's something I would kind of want to tweak with moving forward. And and seeing how that plays out. But the balance of it all is easier than it seems sometimes too, because we care so much about what we're doing. Sometimes you don't want someone else doing another job, right? Like sometimes you're just like, well, this is my vision, so like I wanna have ownership over as many things as I do. So sometimes like, whoa, you do 4 things, and it's like, yeah, because if I only did one thing, I'd lose my mind, like you wanna make sure that it feels like what it should feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Totally, and take ownership. I think that's totally right on. And like for my film, I trained for a year and a half just to develop a process to know how to go back and forth between the acting and the directing, because it is a skill and it's something that you get better at the more you do it. So I spent like I spent a year and a half just sort of cultivating this process because I wanted to go into it knowing that I have a process. And I think that's so important, because half the battle as an artist of any kind is just understanding what your process is and what will facilitate your process.
Could you give a high level of what that process was?
Yeah, I worked with a friend who's an acting teacher and kind of became my coach in developing a process where I was on camera. So I mean, it was very specific. Like I arced out the character. I basically described as a director what I'm looking for in every scene from the actor, which would be me. But just to, again, kind of formally communicate it to myself in the way that I would an actor. And then when I got to set, I had that chart with me at all times so that I knew exactly what the director in me was telling the actor in me.
Oh, very cool.
And then I would do the scene until I felt like it was where I wanted it to be. And then I would watch playback. But I couldn't watch playback, obviously, every take. But I needed to build in time to watch playback for the times when I felt like I had, like the scene in general, from the camera to all of the different actors to the choreography, where I felt like everything was kind of falling into place. But the hardest part is really going into the scene and letting go of all of your expectations as a director and just allowing yourself to be spontaneous. I mean, that is by far the hardest, that's the hardest aspect of acting in general, very often. Mm-hmm. But when you're directing, just letting go of that control and just doing it, and letting go of like what you want as a director. But one of the things that I found was very interesting that I discovered was that when I was off camera acting with someone, I could actually just direct them from within the scene, that I actually didn't need to talk to the actors. I could just change my I could just change my own performance and give them something different to get a different response from them.
Mm.
And that was actually a really cool discovery. Like, I was like, oh, this is great. I can just direct from within right now. But one of my favorite jobs was actually working on Ozark, because I got to watch Jason Bateman direct himself. And that was unbelievable. Like, just to be able to observe him as someone who's been acting since he was a kid, and who's like such a phenomenal director, to see his process and to see how he worked it out was really amazing. Like a master class in directing and acting at the same time.
Yeah.
No, it's a really good point you made though too, of like of being able to affect someone's performance with your performance in the scene. And that's something I've realized on the show. There are certain dynamics in where I'm with certain actors where I have to do that, and my performance looks and feels different, and it's not as free. Like, it's weird. It's like this thing where it's like, if I'm just looking, it's not that it's bad. I'm just like, oh, and a lot of times it informs what's going on with the plot, because sometimes you don't want to be free. Sometimes your character is tense or whatever it might be. But there are certain dynamics where I'm like, oh, I see that. But then when I'm in the scene with an actor who truly knows exactly what they're doing, and you couldn't really tell them which is like when I'm in a scene with Yam, my performance is so different. Like, it's like, I'm like, oh, I'm doing other things because I'm not even trying to, like, I'm just going. Like, I'm not trying to like put up a wall. I'm just like running around. It's such a nuance.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Very interesting perspectives there. So we technically have 10 minutes left, but would you guys mind going an extra 10 minutes? Is that cool?
Yeah, I'm cool.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So one question that I really wanted to ask, because a lot of our folks, are in their phases of either pitching shows or pitching films. You guys obviously both have experience doing that. Ramy, with your show, and Cherian, I know you pitched your films, but more so I'm also talking about the battle of, pitching for example, getting the rights to the book that you are adapting right now, Cherian. Could you sort of walk us through, again, high level of, and maybe we'll start with Ramy, of what your pitch was, high level, when you went into those 6 companies, what it kind of entailed?
Yeah, I think it was really like, I think it's in the first couple minutes, just really describing what it is that you're going to be getting to. I think a lot of times people get caught up early on as to what the plot of their project is going to be, which is important. But I think the thing you really need to lead with is essence. That's just the most important thing. Like, we need to know why what's different, and what's the essence of it. And there's many ways it's not just the word essence. I mean, there's a lot of ways to describe that. But the example of my pitch was, I had kind of 2 lines that I would always say, which is, one being like, there's who you want to be, and there's who you actually are. And we're watching somebody try to fill that gap. And I would also say I'm Muslim American, and I feel most like the hyphen between the 2 words, because I don't really want to take just the lens of one of them, because people have turned those words into like such polarizing ones, and they're both ones that have equal importance to me. And what does it look like to kind of balance those 2 things? And so I think when you say those 2 statements, you already know what the show is, and then like all the plot is kind of like, oh, okay, cool, and then this thing happens, and this thing happens, and this thing happens. But I think you really need to like get into the psychology and get into kind of like the what it is that is going to be the central tension, right? Because we were just talking earlier about having flawed characters. Again, like, it all rests in good tension. Most of that tension is human tension. Like, the most important tension is human tension, and then the plot like makes that rise to the top. And so that would be my advice of like anyone who's in that pitching phase: have everything ready and have all of that stuff ready. But what's the machine? What's the engine of like, what is it you're making? Why is it different? What's the tension that we're going to see that's unique? That's really defining. And probably like tone after that, Cherian, like tone,
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, tone is massively important. I mean, I think you're touching upon like definitely the most important thing, which is like why this show, and what is this show? It's like, that is always the way that you lead when you're pitching. I'm actually pitching 2 shows right now, and one is getting some traction, so fingers crossed. But and I've also pitched things in the past, so I've been like I've been at it for a little while, and I've created a number of different pitches, and definitely the passion, the going in, the why, the what the show is, and the tone are, I think, really by far the most important. And then you start going into characters and right, and then pilot. Ramy, when you pitched your show, did you have a pilot written already? Oh wait, what just happened? I can't hear you.
I got muted by accident. I muted myself by accident. No, when I pitched, I had a 45-minute stand-up tape, and it had a bunch of jokes that ended up being the basis of the season, and I basically kind of broke down the tape. I had opened up just talking about I talked about sex, I talked about condoms, which ended up being like a big scene in my pilot. I had a big chunk about why can't you be into your cousin, which ended up being our finale. I had a big chunk about I had a bunch of family stuff, and so all this stuff where I was basically like, off this joke will be this character. But like, I think, yeah, you need like a proof of concept, right? Whether it be like a short film that provides tone, whether it be, obviously in my case, a stand-up thing, or the script in hand. But it kind of depends at what phase you're at, right? Because sometimes they want to shape it with you, sometimes they want to see it written.
Definitely.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So before we get to our audience questions or attendees questions, we do a quick rapid fire. So it's 5 questions. First thing that comes to your mind, hit me with it. I'll let you guys battle out who can go first.
My rapid fire response is Cherian.
always Ramy. I vote Ramy.
Okay, so Ramy, you're gonna have to go. First. So one book you'd recommend to a filmmaker. Doesn't have to be a filmmaking book, but one book you'd recommend.
Letters to a Young Poet.
Love that one. The Art of Dramatic Writing.
Awesome. One movie that you find yourself going back to for inspiration.
The Graduate.
In the Mood for Love. It's the first one that came to mind. Love that movie.
One movie you wish you made.
Anything Wes Anderson. It's not the tone that I play in, but like, because it's his. But I mean, probably, I think the extended answer is I grew up with my dad being a hotel manager. So I think when I saw Grand Budapest Hotel, it was like one of the most emotional experiences for me. And I was like, man, I wish I made it.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm totally blanking. One movie I wish I made. I'm like going, I don't even know what my favorite movies are right now. Yeah, I'm gonna have to come back to this one.
Oh, you come back. It's funny you said the hotel manager thing. That's my dad was also in the hotel business, so.
Oh yeah.
Totally feel you on that. The next question is, what would you tell your younger self?
It's gonna be all right. It's like, come on, man, just don't. It's gonna be all right. I would just probably tell him to drink more water and pray more. I really do think my younger self was really dehydrated. I'd just be like, dude, just drink more water and pray every day. You'll be fine. Just stop.
Oh, that's awesome. I think I would tell my younger self. Oh, wait, are you guys still there? Oh, I lost you. I think I'd tell my younger self 3 things. One is relax. And as a part of relax, stop taking yourself so seriously. And then I think I would also say, stop trying to please everybody. Yeah.
Great answers. And the last question is kind of a nod to our application process. We usually have one sort of silly question. This one is, what type of food would you be and why?
What type of food would I be? Pizza. Pizza, man. Yeah, different. You can eat it at any time, cold, hot, whatever. I'm down. I'll be versatile like pizza, I guess. That or like koshari. Like I guess.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
that's really funny. That's so specific. I was just gonna say, like, I feel like I'd be like a piece of fruit, like something you have to peel, something you have to peel back to really get to know, you know, because I'm like, I like try to be all mysterious when you first, like, you don't know what it is. Then you peel it and you're like, oh, it's kind of soft on the inside.
You are mysterious. The first time I met you,
it's a little tough on the outside, but it's really soft on the inside.
No, yeah.
You're like avocado. Yeah.
It's very true.
With a really tough nut in the middle.
Great answer. All right, so we're going to open this up. Let's open it up to Priya. Priya has a question. Priya M. And Priya, yeah, we'll unmute you if you want to turn your camera on. You're going to have to do that.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been very, very helpful. So I am in the process of developing a show about immigrants as well. And I've been, pitching it to different people, for some people from LA who invariably have been white, usually. And I actually did get the note that it was culturally too specific. So I guess my question was, and I love the idea about being open to feedback. So I guess my question is, in the place where you have a story that is deemed culturally too specific, how do you find the balance between being open to feedback but also not letting your story get whitewashed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think sometimes what the instinct is to think, like, I remember pitching something around a Muslim family and they were like, well, what if they're like neighbors to like this white family? That's kind of like the instinct, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's almost like it's almost like you need to try and like add an emotional state that's universal, right? So I'm not random example. It's like, okay, yeah, it's a story about this and this, but it's also a story about depression. Like I think like trying to bring in the universal human condition that you're getting at with your characters is really important. Is making sure that you're able to talk about what they're going through in a way where the person who's with you, yeah, maybe they have never experienced the thing that you're going through specifically, but you can almost describe an emotional state that's so clear to them that they're like, oh, well, I have felt that, but just with a different thing. I think just getting clearer about the emotions could probably help a lot.
I would add that, I mean, honestly, I'm just going to be really honest. I feel like anybody who's telling you that your show is too culturally specific is just not the right. I think at this point, they seriously don't get it. I just, that's
told me, like, the feedback I also got was like, do you need to have 2 Indian immigrants in your show? Can't you just have 1? And then the other feedback I also got was like, why don't you add some immigrants who maybe don't know English and are taking like English classes so you can add to the comedy of the show? And I'm like, but why is that funny? Why is that a punchline?
Have you gotten any feedback that's actually helpful, that's like about the story that you're telling?
Some of it, not from this particular person with the feedback, some of it has been useful. But I feel like I keep coming up against this thing of basically, I guess my point is that I'm trying to write this immigrant story because I don't feel like I see always the immigrant perspective. It's usually like the first generation descendants of immigrants who are telling their story. And also like the story of immigrants is evolving constantly, right? The story of the parents who came like 30 years ago is going to be very different from the immigrants who live in America right now and what they're experiencing right now. And so my aim was to kind of update that notion as well and talk about the journey that immigrants go through, the idea that immigrants, yes, everyone comes here for a better life, but what does that better life look like? It looks different for different people. So I don't know, I feel like the constant pushback I've gotten is that, oh, but we have fresh off the boat. Yeah.
I see. Right. I mean, I think Ramy has a really good point in saying that maybe the universal emotional part of the story is not coming across as much if people are fixating too much on the specificity, because I mean, the specificity is obviously supposed to be there. It's inherent to an immigrant story, but maybe there needs to be more of an emphasis on the emotional, the universal emotional story.
The interesting thing is that I actually have a pilot that I made off of the script, and people who see, and the constant feedback I've gotten from people, I actually have like a survey, and the constant feedback from watching the pilot is that it is very universal in its specificity. So yeah, I don't know, maybe something in the way I'm pitching is what I need to work on, I guess.
Maybe. I mean, I think those are good. I think that's a good question to ask yourself, is like, how can I maybe present this differently? And also maybe ask yourself, like, if it's ready to be taken out, because if you continually get that response, then I think that's a response that's telling you that you maybe need to try a different approach, you know?
Yeah. We're going to move on to the next question, because I want to give an opportunity we've got a ton of questions coming in. But thanks, Priya, for that. I think that was really helpful for folks who are pitching. Let's go over to Meenakshi. She has a question for Cherian and TV directing.
Hey, Jan. Thanks so much for today. It's been great so far. You talked a lot about your experience getting your first features made. Just wanted to ask you how it was to start directing television.
Yeah, it was really, really challenging. And funny enough, right after I broke into directing episodic television, there was like a couple of years after I broke in, there was like this huge push to hire women in television. So the good news is it's not as challenging now as it was when I broke in. But one of the ways in which I did it, you know, I had made 2 features at that point. And so I thought, like, well, obviously I'm going to get a chance. I've made 2 features, but that still wasn't enough at that time. So what I did was I had a really good relationship with the showrunner from the L Word. And I had only written on the L Word because I hadn't made a feature yet. I never directed any L Word. But the showrunner from the L Word was now showrunning Empire. And so what I did was I pushed my agent to get her, to reach out to her, to get her to give me my first episode of television, and to her credit, she did. So again, it just goes back to the idea of relationships. Like, relationships are so important, and nurturing them is so important, and you just never know where someone's going to end up. I just got an email the other day from someone who was working at Entertainment Weekly back when Enrico was at Sundance, and Entertainment Weekly threw a party for Enrico, and now he's head of creative at Hulu. And he was emailing me just to say hi and to say, hey, remember me? And I'm so proud of you for the work you've done on Ramy, and I love the show. And I just was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Like, I never would have thought that, you know, you just don't know where people are going to end up. And so it's really important to nurture your relationships and maintain them. And that is really what's going to give you your best shot in directing television.
Awesome, thanks. We had a question from Ahmed regarding stereotypes and being specific in the room. Let's see if we can get him to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hi, yes. First of all, a huge fan, and as a third culture kid from Egypt who's lived in Bahrain, who's then lived in the US, like the show is just so important for me. And I think something that I wanted to talk about is I love how the show takes a lot of the stereotypes or maybe the quirks that we as Egyptians have come to acknowledge and even laugh at about ourselves. So for example, Egyptians taking multiple suitcases of gifts whenever they go back home, which is so real as a person who grew up in an Egyptian household. But also, like, as we all know, like, stereotypes can go from relatable and even laughable to maybe a bit reductive really quickly. I know a lot of my peers in the Gulf talked about how the representation of the Sheikh in the 4th episode with Mia of the 2nd season with Mia Khalifa, where he talks about how some of his wealth was oil money, and that was a lot of, like, that was, you know, a hot like you know, a flinch, knee-jerk reaction for a lot of my Gulf-based friends. And so my question is, how do you have conversations about stereotypes versus specificity in the room, and what are some tactics that you found helpful in turning stereotypes on their heads and utilizing them in the show effectively?
It's a great question. It's a really good question, because it's like, in a lot of ways you're playing with fire, right? Because it's like I think to me, a lot of these stereotypes are out there, and what's really interesting is, with a show like ours, is we get to make them our own, and we get to kind of put our own twist on them. And then more importantly, we try to like make ourselves laugh, right? And so I think the line is always, well, we want to take ownership. We want to make sure we have a take on it, and we want to make sure that there's like something interesting. We're seeing something that we haven't seen before. It has been interesting, I think. I think part of the thought and you know, behind that specific character is it's the first one we've shown of someone from the Gulf, and right. I think it'll be smoothed out, I think, as we get to do more. I mean, I think the show has a lot of aspirations in terms of places I want it to go and types of characters and that I want us to see. So yeah, it to me, I personally, that portrayal comes from a loving place. It comes from a laughing place, and he also is very clear where he's like, that's not our stereotype. I mean, I know that's right. That's not the only source. But again, I think it kind of goes back to that thing where someone's like, oh man, we haven't seen this before, or we have seen it, but we've only seen it in one light. We want to see it differently. And so again, it's always this balance of like, can we bring a different take to it? And I think overall on every episode, that's always our goal, is we don't have to shy away from something just because it's what's been said before. It's more, let's make sure we're saying it on our own terms and saying something new. Yeah.
So
awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. So that's unfortunately gonna have to be our last question, but Cherian, Ramy, thank you so much for doing this. It really, really means a lot. I know you guys are both busy, so I'm glad we were able to do all of this. I'm just gonna share my screen here for our next two talks. We will be taking a hiatus after June 22nd, but we have filmmaker Mariam Kashvarez coming in. She's done some wonderful films, has been around the festival circuit, is an amazing person in general. And then after her on June 22nd, we've got Taika Waititi and actor, rapper Utkarsh Ambudkar coming in as well. So we hope you guys can join for that. Again, Cherian, Ramy, thank you so much. Really, really means a lot. This was super insightful. And yeah, seriously, thanks, and keep up the amazing work. You guys are obviously representing this whole community and beyond. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.